Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Great Homes for Greater Manchester's Key to Recovery Summit. This is our first summit, and we're going to be looking at building back green and net zero homes and places in Greater Manchester. Just like to quickly thank all of those people who have joined us today. Particular thanks always goes to our sponsors, which are Greater Manchester housing providers, Anthony Collins and the Home Builders Federation. We'll be hearing from all of those people today. About Great Homes for Greater Manchester, it's about delivering better homes for the people who live and work in Greater Manchester. Greater Homes for Greater Manchester is a coalition which brings together key voices from across the housing sector, influencers and decision makers to get behind the delivery of Greater Manchester's ambitions and mayoral ambitions to build collaboration and consensus and share the plan how best to deliver homes and places Greater Manchester needs today and tomorrow. We live in very interesting times as we come out of the recovery. We need to work out how do we unlock that recovery and actually deliver some of the ambitions that we have. This particular session and the summit series is designed to take forward the recommendations we made in our report from last year, which was making the vision a reality and doing housing differently. Just wanted to quote something that Mayor Paul Dennett quoted in that report, because I think it's just important to reflect where we are. He said, if we are to level up and build our way out of recession and deliver 179,000 homes by 2037, Greater Manchester needs to reimagine, innovate and put in place new approaches and processes to build back better housing places and reprioritise. It needs powers which are equal to Greater London and the ability to directly remedy its housing crisis. I wanted, reading that this morning, I just thought, well, I think I wanted to make reference to that because it does paint such a big challenge. And today we're looking at a very massive challenge in terms of decarbonising homes, but also reaching a net zero economy by 2038. I think those twin tracks of recovery, meeting net zero ambitions and delivering high quality, affordable housing is an enormous challenge. But remembering we do have powers and we have the ability to do things differently in Greater Manchester. Greater Manchester, or Great Homes to Greater Manchester, is about showcasing what we can do. So this important session, we'll look at particularly how we can lead the way in the delivery of net zero housing and green retrofit, how we can use those devolved powers and harness the green skills and jobs it needs to build back better and retrofit green homes and places, and boost recovery and kickstart a green retrofit programme and deliver a just transition. I'm joined by some excellent speakers and great people for Greater Manchester. We have the excellent Andrew Stunell, Lord Andrew Stunell, who is also the president of the National Home Improvement Council and a stalwart of Greater Manchester. Really pleased to welcome John Slaughter from the Home Builders Federation, who is actually a resident of Chesham and Amersham. So we've had a good chat earlier about the election result last night, and obviously Andrew Stunell's very happy about that result too. From Great Greater Manchester housing providers, we have Charlie Norman, who's Chief Executive also of Mosscare St Vincents. Really pleased to welcome for the first time Suzy Jones, Director of Future Lab, who will no doubt be talking about some of the excellent work that Urban Splash are doing to create greener homes and places. We also have Henri Murison, the Director of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership. Most of you will have read Northern Power Homes, and I'm sure there'll be reference to that and how decarbonisation is so key to transformation and recovery as we move forward. Also Nick Goldspink from N8 Research Partnership. Again, they've looked very much at the innovation required and the jobs and the capability gap to achieving the ambitions of decarbonised homes and places. Always welcome to welcome anybody from IPPR North, and it's good to see Jonny Webb, who will also be referencing his work. And later on, we'll be joined, I think, by Lord Best, who also was the chair of the Affordable Housing Commission. So we've got a stellar lineup, and we're going to have a great session. So I think that's all on the slides, isn't it, Emily? Oh, yes, just a few quick housekeeping notes. The recording, as you know, we are being recorded, so you'll all be aware of that. Please do tweet throughout the session using Keys to Recovery or at GH4GM to continue the debate online. Do use the chat function as we go along. I'll do my best to bring as many questions and answers and keep the discussion lively. And use the raise the hand function, and I'll be monitoring as much as I can any comments or questions or thoughts that emerge in the chat, but we're all used to it now. Please, just for one more time, I will say, make sure you unmute before you speak, and it would always be good if you could say where you're from and introduce yourself and your question. But we'll see how we get on. It is going to be a lively session, and we've got some really big questions on our agenda. So without further ado, I'm going to ask all of our panelists in one way or another to answer the big question on today's agenda. See if we can answer it between us, and that is, how do we build back green and net zero homes and places in Greater Manchester? That's the big question. So bear that in mind, and hopefully I'll be able to at the end sort of work out what we do need to do, and that will ultimately direct and shape our thinking and lobbying as we move forward. So I'm going to ask Andrew Stunell to kick us off, if that's all right, Andrew, and to also perhaps sort of look at the immediate challenges for Greater Manchester recovery and how we can actually scale up the need to build back greener homes. Okay, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Jill, for the introduction. I think I'm rather the lightweight in the panel, and actually this morning I'm a little bit lightheaded as well. As you say, we had an excellent result in that by-election last night. I've got 3 minutes, and I'm supposed to be lively, punchy and provocative. So I decided I would do that in favour of having a PhD thesis on what is actually an extremely complex interlocking problem. So let's just start with some basics. Let's focus on the right target. I hear a lot of discussion about how the social sector is going to lead this. Can we please remember that in Greater Manchester, we've got 700,000 owner-occupiers, and we need to tackle them at the rate of about 60,000 homes a year through to 20. Well, you can put your own finish date, but even on the government's finish date of 2050, it's something like 60,000 homes a year have to be dealt with. So social housing is seen as the easy, or at least the accessible target, but we mustn't lose sight of the real target, which is how do we get owner-occupiers to have their homes upgraded. And to do that, we need the right ammunition. I hear a lot of discussion about how we need whole street or whole community refurbishment. And I have to say, I think that that's not deliverable. In fact, I think it's delusional. We need to remember that small is beautiful and small makes it deliverable. And if we're talking about owner occupiers, we have to think in terms of individual families, individual circumstances, individual house designs, and individual financial backing, and work out a scheme that works for them. So if we've got the right target and the right ammunition, have we got the people to fire the ammunition? The answer is no. We need to build the skills. And this is my first direct challenge. Further education in Greater Manchester is failing to deliver the skills that we need to achieve this. And higher education in Greater Manchester is completely AWOL when it comes to delivering the professional skills that we need. So let's just look at further education. If you look at construction related courses delivered in Greater Manchester, 60% of those who take construction related courses disappear completely. They don't go into the industry at all. 16% take on apprenticeships of one sort and another, construction apprenticeships. And of them, half disappear from the industry completely and don't finish their apprenticeships. And that means that about 32% actually get into the industry. So for every 100 students that FE takes on with construction related training, only 32 finish up in the industry. So quite apart from whether we've got the right quality of skills, we absolutely haven't got the right quantity of skills. And another factor which is rather important, if we believe in diversity, is that 84% of those people who finish up in the industry via that route are men, and 16% are women. And furthermore, BAME members of the community are seriously underrepresented. Only about half the share you would expect of BME young people and adults, for that matter, finish up in the construction sector. So we haven't got the right people, we haven't got the right skills, and we're not delivering those skills on any sensible at any sensible rate or speed or quality at the moment. And we need to build the capacity and change some of those skills. We need heat pump installers, we need energy assessors, we need project managers under PAS 2030. And my question is there any Greater Manchester institution at the moment offering courses this September in any of those skill areas? And what the Green Homes Grant, admittedly a fiasco in many ways, but what it showed is that even now, today, this year, this month, we do not have anything like enough energy assessors or heat pump installers or project managers in Greater Manchester to deliver even at the very low and slow rate that the Green Homes Grant was delivering. And my question is, where is higher education in all of this? They should be looking at those professional qualifications, they should be recruiting people, they should be having the conversion courses for professionals, and making sure that there is a steady stream of people to do it. So there you go, that's as immediate as I could get it. It's as provocative as I could make it. Where is the proper skills and training audit for Greater Manchester that says these are the people we need, these are the skills we need, these are the colleges which are going to deliver it, these are the firms which are going to be in partnership, and let's get on with it. Let's have a skills audit as one of our #1 priorities, a round table with the further and higher education sectors in Greater Manchester, hammering out exactly who's going to do what, how quickly, and let's get some results so that we can actually look at these targets as being realistic rather than just a dream world. Thank you very much, Jill.
That's fantastic. Kickstart the debate, and I think we will come back again and again to the capability gap and the skills gap, and also I'm pretty sure that Nick there from NH will talk more about what the northern universities are doing, and I know Henri will do as well. But I want to go to John Slaughter next. Again, you've still got the big question of the how, but particularly leading on from Andrew's tremendous start is what kind of jobs and skills are needed to meet Greater Manchester 2038 net zero target, to build back greener and better homes. I mean, obviously from a house builder's perspective, you know, we've got to think, we've talked about, I'm just talking about heat pumps, you know, solar, all of those things. And we work also on the net zero all party parliamentary group and spend a lot of time, you know, wrestling with this problem of how a lot of it is behavioural change, but I'm particularly interested in terms of housing development, what kind of skills, and is Andrew right that capability gap and thinking is as big as it as I think it is too?
Thanks, Jill. Well, yeah, I mean, I fear it is. That's the evidence that we have generally, I'm afraid, Jill, not just in Greater Manchester, but across the country, that the actual conversion rate of students, young people who go through FE courses, getting into sustainable jobs in the industry is a fairly low percentage, and that's something we really do need to address. But it's a particularly concerning aspect of the whole question of how we green the industry and build back better. So I think I would totally agree with Andrew's analysis and the challenges he's thrown out in that respect. And I'll come back and say a little bit more about green jobs opportunities. But if I address the big question first about how do we build back green and net zero homes and places in Greater Manchester in a better way than in the past, the simple answer I'd give, the kind of big headline statement, is by having a very clear set of goals and timelines that are agreed across national and Greater Manchester policy. And that in turn needs to be informed by a collaborative dialogue between industry and national and local government. We've done a lot of work in the last year or so, which I've talked to Andrew about separately before the pandemic, about developing a strategy and roadmap for the housing sector on the environmental agenda. And we're just about to publish that. But one of the fundamental aspects of all of that work has been the need for collaboration. And that's certainly collaboration between industry and government, but it's also various aspects of industry. House builders can't deliver these objectives single-handed. We need to interact with the supply chain, with the manufacturers, with the skills providers, as we've been talking about, also the energy utilities and the water utilities. These are all relevant actors to how we achieve the green places we want to build for the future. And there's no doubt the industry now accepts that we need to move forward and make these changes. The challenge for the industry is very much about the practicalities of how we can do that effectively and how that doesn't necessarily, how we can avoid damage to other aspects of what we're trying to achieve through housing provision. So a lot of the work that we've done has been focused on agreeing clear goals and commitments and timelines. And that's what we'll publish in our report on the work we've done, but very much founded on that partnership approach with government and with other actors. And I would stress that if we're going to be successful on this, then we do all need to work together with shared goals and commitments and timelines, because otherwise it's just not going to work in the right way. So that's the kind of really big point I wanted to make. And I think for us, in terms of what we're looking at, the net zero challenge for new housing is very real and imminent, with a future home standard in 2025. A lot of work to do to get to that. There's also going to be a lot of work to do on embodied carbon, which frankly hasn't been looked at in a collective way across the industry or the construction sector up till now. And that's a massive part of the challenge in terms of net zero. Again, we need collaborative working and to see what are the right goals and commitments that people can practically deliver to get to those ultimate objectives. We'd like to work with authorities like Greater Manchester on structured scale up. That's my other big point for today. that we can talk about the national picture. But the industry is going to need to do R&D. It's going to need to prove new models of design, layout for development, the way that we configure service provision, demand management, all sorts of aspects of new development to achieve the overall objectives we want. And we'll need to be able to scale that up. You can't just have a big bang with everyone changing everything overnight. You need to do it properly. So I think the really big opportunity is to work with authorities like Greater Manchester on that scale up programme. Just very quickly go back to jobs and skills, Jill. Andrew's analysis was very good. So heat pump installers will be the #1 thing. And that's the kind of risk factor for new build with the Future Home Standard. We don't have enough installers today. They don't have the right skills. We don't necessarily have the right understanding of what the challenges will be for design and functionality of housing across the professions at this stage to meet the new standards. So we do need a really good and joined up programme of upskilling the sector and the professions and others on that. And the skills requirements will cross pretty much every role in the industry as far as we can see. A lot of it will be upskilling, but there will be new skills requirements. And I think that will be particularly the case on the retrofit side. One of the things that the Construction Leadership Council in London has been talking about is a national retrofit strategy. And a big part of that will be investment in skills. You'll need for retrofit people like retrofit coordinators that don't really exist as a role now. People skills and how to, Andrew's point about individuals and individual contexts, you'll really need people to have the soft skills as well as the technical skills to manage this process, because if we don't work effectively with the population, it's not going to happen. But I'll leave it there and hope that's a useful addition to the debate.
Yeah, no, really is. Thank you very much, John. I think that whole thing about really the scaling up, joining up, leveling up. There's a lot of ups there, but it is very much around collaboration. And it's that sort of, I think we're very good at setting targets and goals in Greater Manchester, but in my long life of lobbying on various causes, I'm yet to see targets actually be met, and that is the big fear, I think, when you think about climate change of 2050. And so there's a lot of the big problem is there's a lot of people saying, yeah, there is a climate emergency, but the people from the Climate Change Committee and others, and certainly in the Net Zero or parliamentary group, think we're about 20 years behind where we should be. So that levelling up, joining up is so important, I think. I'm going to turn now to Charlie, who is going to take us on to another really important thing that came out of last year, really, is that we all really value where we are in our environments, our homes and places, because we spend so much time. There's Nick there in his conservatory now, and we need to be very conscious of how we link the environment and our health and well-being on communities, and know what good looks like and the benefits there. So apart from the big question of how do we actually get there, it's really what can be done now and sooner or later, really, to really capitalize on this sort of opportunity to really build back better, greener and homes and communities which actually help health and well-being as well. Okay, Charlie.
Thanks so much, Jo. I think this is going to be one of those sessions where we're all in violent agreement again, but we need to get cracking with it and work together on it. Absolutely agree with what John and Andrew have said. And Andrew's provocation at the start really resonated with me, which was, so I represent the Greater Manchester Housing Providers, which is the social housing providers across Greater Manchester. And appreciate entirely the comment about owner-occupiers and the private rented sector, Andrew. But I do think we've got an opportunity, because of the collaboration with the Greater Manchester Housing Providers, that we can work together at scale at pace to do something on this and then set a standard and almost try and influence what happens with the rest of the housing stock. But yeah, it represents a small part of the overall housing stock. So I represent the Greater Manchester Housing Providers Group. And I can't emphasize enough how much there is a massive commitment, and this has come right to the fore of the work that we're doing, along with lots of other things around homelessness and building new homes and health and well-being, and how important the home is to our health and well-being, and having a safe, warm and decent home and place to age well, to start well and to live well. It's just so important. For MSV, our corporate plan is entitled People, Planet and Place, and we've brought those things together, been very serious about the climate emergency as well as the housing emergency. So just a quick reminder, the housing providers, there's 26 organisations representing 1 in 5 homes in Greater Manchester, 250,000 homes, and we employ about 28,000 people. And a lot of those people are currently working on gas boilers and installing gas boilers and repairing gas boilers and all of that. And all of those homes need to be retrofitted to meet the target, which we have signed up to, of 2038, and that is a tall order. We've been doing some work led by Colette McCune, who's leading this for us with the Greater Manchester Housing Providers Group, to quantify what that actually means in terms of cost. And just for 17 of the housing providers, it's going to cost £4.4 billion to meet that target. So that money and the grant funding for that is going to have to come from somewhere. Nevertheless, the commitment is there to actually do this and to retrofit the existing housing stock, but also meet the targets that John's outlined about new homes and meeting the targets there about net zero carbon targets for new homes. I do think there is a big opportunity here, as we've said, which is about, we've just had, we're in a pandemic, global pandemic. We're going to have to build resilience and build new work and good work coming out of that. We've got a housing crisis and we've got the climate emergency. And there is an opportunity here to create a whole green new industrial revolution and create new skills and new jobs, as everybody's outlined. I completely agree on the point about young people and the institutions and the sort of curriculum. And I bore young people that I bump into every day now saying, you need to get into this area. This is what you should be doing in terms of apprenticeships and learning. So it is a big ask, and there is a lot of money that needs to be spent on it. But this is about fundamentally having a healthy home, and I think that's really important. But I do think talking about air source heat pumps, talking about fabric first, talking about how we actually get there is really important. But people have referenced that this is going to be about people and how we bring people along within our communities, and there's going to have to be a lot of work done. And the reality is that when people are really worried about putting food on the table and worried about where they're living and have unstable housing conditions, this is not top of the agenda, and we're going to have to work with people to bring people along. So I think change champions, young ambassadors, people like that within communities is going to be really important, and carbon literacy through our organisations and through our operations. We have committed to meet the targets. We have done a baseline and quantified what we need to do. I think there's a whole thing, as Jill's referenced, which is about biodiversity, it's about green space, it's about the places that we live in, and clean air and good quality air is really important. And it is that thing about bills, and people will be worried about bills increasing and electricity costs and things like that. So that is a major challenge for us. And the reality is that we've got workforces that need to skill up now and need to change their skills, but there is an opportunity as well to work together to create apprenticeships and new jobs around the retrofit agenda and air source heat pumps and all of the other sort of no regrets technology that we need to deploy. So I think we need to start now. We are starting now. We need a plan for every single home in Greater Manchester across the whole housing sector, and it is going to have to be getting down to the granular detail of each home. We have a lot of really hard to treat properties. We've got a lot of older stock. We've got pre-1999 terraced housing that's going to be difficult to treat. We're going to have to work with the residents, and there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all strategy here. So we've joined the GM Decarbonisation Task Force and starting to work together on this at scale, and in terms of supply chain and how we get this agenda going. I just wanted to end with a proverb that I've heard, and it just resonated so much, and I've said it before at different events, which is that we have to act on this now. The proverb goes that we haven't inherited the earth from our ancestors, we've borrowed it from our children. So we do have a moral imperative to do this work, as well as creating safe, decent and warm homes for people to live in. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. That's really great and very thought-provoking at the end there. I think the other thing that resonated very much with me there is, people, it's fine us saying it's a priority, and a lot of people, policymakers saying it's a priority, but when you are struggling and you've been through a pandemic, climate change or retrofitting isn't necessarily the first thing that they are thinking about, and that has been ever thus on, obviously it sometimes is a choice between heating and paying for food, or what in eating, isn't it? And so I think, how we actually generate that sort of, that it's affordable, that the transition, it's all often thought of something that's for later on. And I think there's a lot of myth busting that also needs to happen moving forward to get people on board. But again, I agree with you, as I often do, that this is the time, and we've never had an opportunity to really get this right, and for Greater Manchester to lead the way. So I'm going to now switch to Suzy from Urban Splash, who's also going to build on the current theme, but really a focus here on, what can we do to better drive net zero innovation and solutions to decarbonise our existing homes and buildings, but also new homes as well. And obviously Urban Flash, I called you Urban Flash, Urban Splash, Freudian slip, is very, at the forefront always of thinking about housing differently. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you've got to say, Suzy.
Thank you, Jill. So I'm just going to I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think can be done, what the challenges are, but also show, I have 3 slides to show so that there's examples of the homes that we deliver to give a bit of context. But before we do that, I suppose driving net zero innovation and solutions specifically for homes, neighbourhoods and buildings is for me about supporting the acceleration and adoption of alternative practices. And those alternative practices aren't necessarily difficult. It's fueling, for want of a better word, that the acceleration and adoption of those practices, and putting the things in place that encourage that adoption. And the best way to do that is to encourage more of it through policy, and investing in reducing the commercial risk of it through funding. And those, I think, are the 2 things where I think there are opportunities. I mean, net zero innovation for future and existing stock is absolutely about acting now, because the things that we're putting through planning now, for example, will be realised in several years, when all of those targets and frameworks are really coming into play. So we're starting to think now about how we achieve those things further in the future. And it is about, I think, as Charlie said, about changing behaviour and changing thinking. So it's more about that than it is about, innovation in new technologies. Although, of course, when it comes to efficient management of resources, it is absolutely about that. But before we get to that point, it's I feel about changing behaviour and the way in which people think. Some of the best net zero innovations are very, very simple. They're just not currently standard practice, and therefore they're often more expensive. As Andrew and John said, it's often more difficult to find the skills to deliver them, and they pose supply chain issues when you're looking at doing these things at scale. And as you said, Urban Splash are well known for innovation, and well known for kind of trying to drive the future of the industry. And as we started House by Urban Splash, which is our neighbourhood and home building arm, we did that with the same passion for innovation and delivering the best homes and neighbourhoods we can. And approaching neighbourhood development in that way produces amazing places like New Islington in Manchester, which I'll show images of in a moment. But it's not the path of least resistance. And that's, I think, the challenge, which I'll come back to when I've shown you these images. So let me just share my screen and one second. So this is an image of Mansion House, which is a kind of mid-rise apartment building that we have now delivered in New Islington. So this is a render, this image, but it is now delivered, and the units are, I think the majority of them are sold, if not all of them. All of the buildings that we've delivered and the neighbourhood that we've delivered in New Islington is produced with quite innovative approaches to construction. So this particular building is built using CLT, both for the structure and for the finish. It's a panelised system, which is built off-site, and then I think it was put together in 3 weeks by 6 men. It's enormously efficient, but it's also enormously sustainable. This is an interior shot of one of the apartments in Mansion House. It's a kind of dual aspect apartment, and you can see there, this is the CLT structure, which is also the finish of the building. So that not only has this got incredible carbon credentials, but also in terms of well-being, it's well known that kind of natural finishes increase contentment and senses of well-being. This product here is one of our products called Townhouse. Again, this has been delivered in New Islington. And you can see we designed the neighbourhood with these private spaces of your own, which are part of your plot, and then these communal gardens in the centre. And parking is generally away from the homes. We try as much as possible to get parking as far away from the homes as possible and to reduce the number of parking spaces, which is something I'll come back to. Townhouse is, we've just completed our carbon study of Townhouse. It exceeds all existing recognised industry targets for carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. It also exceeds both the GLA and REBA 2030 and ambitions. Where I think literally 40 kilograms of CO2 per metre square away from the LETI 2030 targets. So Townhouse is, in terms of embodied carbon, enormously good, for want of a better word. It's 50% more efficient than the average new build. But like I said, before we started looking at these images, doing these things is not necessarily the path of least resistance. So I'll just stop sharing. Bear with me 1 second. So as I mentioned, I think there's 2 ways in which I think we can encourage this drive to net zero through innovation. And that really, for me, is firstly around policy. So policy which encourages low embodied greenhouse gas emissions. For example, higher scoring for development partners with low embodied carbon credentials, encouraging timber build and MMC, which reduces waste and is well suited for design for deconstruction and reuse. I think there's, relatively straightforward planning policy which could be considered, which discourages combustion engine car ownership, and that, in contrast, encourages local last 3-mile travel by other means, such as walking and cycling. And we often come up against sort of policies where we're trying to achieve something within our neighbourhoods, which is really difficult to achieve through existing policy. And one of those is, as I mentioned, around parking spaces. This is, it seems really, really straightforward, but the kind of 3 parking spaces for a 4-bed home, for example, doesn't necessarily encourage the reduction in car ownership. I mean, it's something we always try to do within our schemes, but it's something that's generally pushed back on. In terms of operational emissions, we struggle a lot with the EPC measurements. And that's because our homes are entirely powered through electricity. And the EPC scoring, although we're 50% more efficient than the average new build, because we're electric only, we score an EPC of B. Whereas and I suppose this is about metrics and how that energy efficiency is measured. If it's measured using an energy use intensity measurement, which is kilowatt hours per meter squared, our kilowatt hours per meter squared is around 36, whereas the average new build, so traditional new build, is between 88 and 25 kilowatt hours per meter squared. So it's really around looking at the ways in which we are measuring the efficiency of these homes. The final point I wanted to make was really around funding and financial support to minimise the commercial risk of this type of innovation for early adopters. So our products are currently more expensive than traditional new builds because we're innovating, and that is difficult not only for us but also for our customers. So it's difficult for us to reach those kind of affordable values because we're investing in new ways of building, new ways of delivering neighbourhoods, and because of this issue around costs of electricity at the moment. And all of those things will change as the grid decarbonises, as the rest of the industry catches up with us, but at the moment it's enormously expensive. So how can funding and other financial support that kind of early innovation whilst we transition?
Yeah, it's such an important point around scaling up and acceleration. And I think what you've highlighted very well there is how it's out of kilter. And also it's still that, on the myth busting thing, which, things have got to accelerate in policy terms, because people will say to you 9 times out of 10, electricity is more expensive. I don't want electricity. But that is actually not where we need to be now. We need to be getting people's heads around that it's not unusual to have solar energy, or the heat pumps is the future, but there's such a lack of awareness. But lovely to look at New Islington and to just show what Greater Manchester can do with innovation, but there is a challenge there in terms of affordability and a just transition and who pays. Really grateful for that intervention. Now, I'm very pleased to welcome Henri. Hi, nice to see you. Henri Murison from Director of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership. He's going to look at, one could argue, and I would argue, the advantage that Greater Manchester has in terms of it does have devolved powers, not enough of them, but just to move it on a little bit, big targets from Andy Burnham in his manifesto, 30,000 zero carbon homes for social rent. And 2038 and all of those things. So Henri, how can we better use devolved powers to develop and harness the green skills and jobs that we so desperately need, and build back, recover and retrofit green homes and places? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Jill, and I'll try and do that in 3 minutes, but I'll be as close to on the money as I can be. So I think what we would say is you have to look at the whole energy system, and I'm sure we might hear a bit more about hydrogen from my esteemed colleague from the NHIC, so I won't steal his thunder. But I think what I would say is you have to think first about how we decarbonise. Insulation clearly is very important, but as we move from what we would call the low-hanging fruit of cavity wall and loft insulation from a decade and 2 decades ago, which was very successful through a place-based approach and warm zones across the country, as well as EGA, which, despite being a national entity in reality had significant local partnerships built into it. We do need to rediscover that local place leadership around this agenda, because a lot of the national initiatives, and I would cite the one that was launched by the Chancellor in the immediate kind of conflagration of the economic crisis during the pandemic, have perhaps not been as successful as government would have liked them to be. So I think there's a fundamental point, which is that the government's efforts to do this from the centre have been very unsuccessful, and that will require greater devolution of powers and funding to those who are unable to do it. But what I think can uniquely be done at the level of Greater Manchester is some of that strategic thinking. So clearly, heat pumps will be part of the answer. Clearly, there is going to be some role for hydrogen in those places where heat pumps or district heating schemes are not practical. But that all requires a lot of thinking. I mean, it doesn't just happen. I mean, you don't randomly choose where you should do this. And I think it comes back to Lord Stunell's points about private homeowners, which is that you are going to need to send some pretty strong market messages to consumers about what they should and shouldn't do, because actually doing something in this space could be unhelpful, right? In some cases, because some of the actions that people could take as individual residents on individual streets might be contrary to the eventual outcomes that we want to achieve for them and their neighbours in terms of doing some of this at scale. So it's very easy to see how the social rented sector can achieve scale and make sensible, coordinated decisions. It's quite hard to do that with private homeowners unless you've got a really clear pathway to do that. And I think there's some really interesting organisations, for instance, who support installers who are already thinking, and I talk to the business community in this space extensively, how they can work with Greater Manchester to bring their data, GM and the partner local authorities data to the table, to start that work of helping to deliver the right interventions to the right families in the right communities using technologies and financial solutions which are credible and stand up to robust scrutiny as value for money. Because I think all of the decarbonisation event and journey has to be linked to an economic opportunity, Jill. So I want those jobs that were talked about, those better career opportunities at the start of this meeting. And I'm receiving some feedback. Maybe isn't as easy in the social care sector. So maybe I'm being a little bit too optimistic. But I suppose I'm saying, comparatively speaking, capturing those opportunities in the social care sector might be slightly easier. But I think you still have to have the right coordination from the combined authority and the right investment vehicles. Because in the end, a lot of people just sort of think that social housing organisations are sort of like mythical money, and in the end they have their tenants' money, right? And this is in their tenants' interests because it can save them their tenants' money if we do it right. But these solutions have to be value for money. And to be honest, installing heat pumps in people's homes where hydrogen or district heating is a better solution is not good value for money for tenants. And we have to do what's right. And
exactly,
I'm always struck by that kind of industrial opportunity, Jill. So what's in this for Greater Manchester is this is a growth sector where developing skills in GM can then allow that to be exported across the wider Northwest, the wider Northern Powerhouse. Nobody in the UK makes heat pumps, right? So I'd quite like to make some in the UK if we are going to install them. And if we're not going to make them in the UK, maybe we should be using other technologies that we do have within this country, because the reality is that this is an economic spend. And here in Leeds, where I'm talking to you from today, from Arcadis's office and an organisation that's also in Manchester, where my teams happen to be based, there has been a lot of thought given to how the hydrogen transition through the projects led by Northern Gas Networks, very similar to those led by Cadent and colleagues in the Northwest, supported by NW. I've thought a lot about economic opportunities that come from replacing boilers in people's houses, right, with boilers that are ready for hydrogen. This is about jobs. It's not just about abstract climate change issues. Does that make sense? These are about employment. And for those of us who were lucky enough to be involved in this before, in place-based insulation efforts, myself in the northeast of England, but I know the story was very similar in other parts of the north of England. The experience we had was that this was about job creation. So the money that was invested in putting cavity walls in people's houses got people who otherwise would have been unemployed into jobs. And we need to think about this in exactly the same way, which is this isn't about doing something to hit some random target, right, of however soon GM wants to achieve net zero. I mean, as laudable as that is, what GM needs to do is relating to some of the work done by colleagues at IPPR North, and it's great Jonny's here with us today on the just transition. We need to be thinking about how these jobs replace jobs in previously carbon intensive industries. How do we switch people who are going to be absolutely disrupted in their employment by the changes that are happening in our economy and find them these opportunities? And I'm really positive about what can be achieved, But I do think that we absolutely need to not rush headlong into technology choices or efforts which don't have a relationship to the wider transition journey, because decarbonising heat is the most difficult thing to do in the transition. And the homes bit of it is one part of the puzzle. It's an essential part, but it cannot be looked at in isolation from the wider energy transition. And I would really urge that around the devolution journey, GM is rightly investing heavily in its expertise around energy, about seeing energy infrastructure as important to GM's economic growth and future potential as transport has been in the last 2 decades in the thinking of Greater Manchester politicians. And I'm really confident that GMCA is more advanced in that journey than other areas, but there absolutely is an opportunity for combined authorities working across the north of England to embrace some of the exercises like the Ofcom business planning exercise, Jill, that your organisation has supported DNW with, to start to think about, not in abstract terms, how we achieve these things, but actually what local energy action plans, for instance, as an activity will unlock in terms of investment, and making sure that where we do think that, for instance, electrification is the right solution, that the underpinning infrastructure is there. Because again, just installing the heat pumps is in some ways the easy bit. You've got something to connect them to. And I think that wider strategic piece is a key role for GM to play, because the national government of this country has not worked out the connections between UK energy policy, between where the electricity comes from, where the electricity is generated, and where it's used for and what it's used for yet. And I don't think UK central government will ever solve that problem. I think the questions of where in GM is best suited to deployment of hydrogen, where in GM is best suited to district heating schemes, those are questions for the combined authority to answer. And what central government need to do is trust combined authorities and metro mayoral authorities like the one led by Andy Burnham in Greater Manchester to make these choices and to deliver on the ground. So hopefully I'm not droned on for too long, and really looking forward to being part of and participating in the wider discussion. As someone who still has a significant burn in my belly for housing policy, I absolutely think it has a role, but please don't try and take it all on, because you'll end up finding solutions which do not answer the wider challenge around the net zero transition for the whole of the Greater Manchester economy, because homes are an important component of a much wider story. And unfortunately, the decarbonisation of heat is even more complicated than the GM housing market. I wish it wasn't, but it unfortunately is.
Yeah, I'm really taken by that, and I'm bound to agree with you, Henri, anyway. But you know, it's not one size fits all. You've got to have a more local approach. I think Charlie mentioned it as well. You know, we need to know more about the homes and you know, not one solution. It's what works, and also highlighting, you know, that the link here to economic growth is huge, and the potential is huge. And there's some interesting questions in the chat coming up, and I want to bring in Will Swan, definitely, and Tassos, my friend Tassos, as well at some point. But before we do that, we've still got Nick and Jonny, and I want to bring you in now, Nick, not least to talk about the wonders of, perhaps come back on the higher education points on skills, but just to give us a flavour of, I mentioned it earlier, about the capability gap, as I've called it, or you've called it.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, coming at this point on the agenda, it'd be very easy for me to say, go put the kettle on for 5 minutes, because I agree with almost everything that's been said already, particularly with Andrew's opening remarks. And I really want to focus on just 2 elements. One is a people element, and the second is around the skills, and I'll pick up some of those FEHE comments. I think the N8 Research Partnership is putting together a programme with partners across the north called Net Zero North, and we ran a seminar on sustainable construction a few weeks ago, and we had a gentleman by the name of Brad Swing, who's the Director of Energy Policy at the City of Boston, and he had some really interesting perspectives from the challenges and the opportunities and the successes Boston have had over the last 20 years in delivering decarbonisation and green retrofit. And one of the real things that came out of that was that regardless of whose house you are looking to retrofit, whether it be social housing or privately owned housing, there are sensitivities required to going into somebody's house and making changes. We need to get people bought into this process, either through some sort of incentivization strategy, and whether that be grants. You know, do the grants need to be clearer than the ones that already exist? You know, there may need to be a regulatory element. But I think Charlie mentioned that for many people, decarbonisation isn't top of the agenda. Having more basic issues dealt with, is probably higher up the agenda. So is there an opportunity to consider, in addition to retrofitting for decarbonisation, also a consideration of the wider aesthetics and needs of the house, i.e. making the home generally or the place for outside places a better space to be in? And I just also want to say that sometimes we find the language retrofit sounds quite corrective. It sounds like something you come and do to a house that hasn't been built properly. And, we wonder if there's a more positive language around upgrading, improvement. All of those have certain connotations, but sometimes retrofit sounds a little bit brutal. I think, though, as well, people, and this sort of links into the skills element, people need to have improved access to trained contractors who can provide surety about the quality of the service that's going to be delivered. Henri touched on sort of the complexity of the challenge, and within the home there are challenges of complexity. For instance, removing gas central heating for a heat pump, that's dependent on the house being well insulated, as heat pumps don't produce heat at such a high temperature. If you just popped a heat pump into a poorly insulated house, you're probably going to make matters worse. It's also a question of helping the customer understand that there's a need for behavioural change. A heat pump doesn't work the same as gas central heating. And so getting people bought into this process will help to accelerate the programme of retrofit that is needed. Financial business models is the same. It's an enormous bill to pay for this, but I think it's really important that we don't let carbon credentials become a new dividing factor in society that sees the well-off being able to afford low carbon technologies or to offset their lifestyles, whereas the less well-off are struggling to make those adjustments. In terms of skills, I think it also, everyone's touched on some really strong points. There's a real opportunity. I saw somebody else's figures, so forgive me if these aren't accurate, but I saw somebody say that nationally we have around 100,000 gas heating engineers and less than 1,000 heat pump engineers. So there's 99,000 people that may need retraining in the not too distant future. In terms of the if you like, the challenges that FE and HE are facing, as part of our Net Zero North programme, we're looking at developing an alliance between the higher education institutions in the north of England and many of the FE colleges and industry to address the disconnect that exists between the different providers for skills at different levels. We know that there's a substantial skills and capacity gap, and it's not just about providing people with skills, it's making sure that they're retrained to the highest level possible. We know that at HE, I don't represent a single university, so I have to be careful about not putting words into universities' mouths, but I think the universities would recognise that, for instance, if we were looking at enterprise and entrepreneurship training over the last 10 to 15 years, a huge amount has been done within universities to encourage undergraduates to take on this extra training. And I think now there's a recognition that helping undergraduates to understand to be carbon literate, to understand some of the challenges around climate change and green skills is going to be part of the university offering. And we know that FE also faces many challenges. There was a new white paper out in January, which make of that what you will, but there's an increased focus on collaboration. And we see it as being a real opportunity for HE and FE to join forces and make sure that people are being trained in the right things, on modern, up-to-date technologies. So we would hope that certainly within the education sector, we're starting to put in place some of the structures that were needed to support the ambitious programs for GM and for other areas. And just to say, if anyone wants to hear more about the views from the City of Boston, then our webinar is still available on our website, and Brad has some really interesting perspectives, particularly around the challenges of retrofit, but also on some of the some of the great work that they've done on things like green bonds, energy efficiency reporting for buildings, microgrids, and other smart city technologies. So I can post a link if anyone's interested in that. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick, and please do post that link, and I'm sure everybody will be interested in that. I'm going to quickly go over to Jonny now from IPPR North, and it'd be good to hear from you. I mean, I've asked you to sort of talk about this whole thing about transformational change a little bit, but you know how we can actually transform where our homes and buildings in light of the pandemic. But yeah, let's hear what you've got to say, Jonny.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. And I think always a challenge when you're at the end of a panel and everyone's already made some very fantastic points. So I'll try and add something new instead of just agreeing intensely with everyone. But I think we're at a critical moment now in that we've got a lot of policymakers, both nationally as well as locally and at the city region level in Manchester, signed up to the need to create net zero places. At the same time, we hear the slogan a lot, we need to build back better, we need to do something different after the pandemic. But I think a challenge still remains in that for a lot of people, the question would be, what does that actually look like? So if we're going to create these net zero places, we're going to transform our housing stock, we're going to go green, what does that actually mean? And I think there's still a challenge in addition to all of the policy challenges that everyone's outlined in terms of, not just retrofitting the homes, but, retrofitting the skills system too and creating the skills. Those are significant policy challenges. But I think there's also a significant challenge which needs to be engaged with around how we communicate this stuff and how we almost imagine this, because the challenge a lot of people have today is we're talking about doing something which is significant and we need to do to get to net zero. But I guess the challenge would be, is that exciting enough for people? Is that something that engages people? We all engage with this stuff on a fairly regular basis. So we're all very interested in it and prepared to engage around it. But actually, how do we get everyone else interested in it? And I think the answer to that is we need to emphasize the importance of doing this in relation to tackling the climate crisis. We also need to show people that we're going to get something better at the end of this. So at the minute, we're coming out of the pandemic. We've seen some new trends develop in the pandemic. We don't know how long term they're going to be yet. But regardless, we do have an opportunity now to rethink the places we live as well as the places we work. And I think what we really need to start doing is engaging more with people and actually going to citizens themselves and asking them, what is it that you want from the places that you not only live, but also the places you work and the places you socialize? And I think if we start asking those questions, we're going to have a much more constructive dialogue with people, and we're going to get a lot of answers back around what net zero places actually should be, what they should be for, and what they should look like. So I think that's definitely something that's missing from the debate at the minute and something that we need to do. I think that what is really promising is you see it across not just Greater Manchester, but also the Liverpool City region. I do think the North is really leading the way in terms of thinking about what net zero places look like. You've seen the mayors really commit to this agenda and say this is pretty much their number one priority in terms of making our places net zero, making our homes net zero. So there's definitely the political energy and willingness to do things around this. And there is now as well the powers in place to do a lot of this stuff. There's not all the powers that the mayors need, but a lot of the powers are there, particularly in terms of linking up the skills system, as well as incentivizing house building, retrofit, and thinking about the spatial plan of places. So we do have the powers in place. But I think really now the key thing that we need to do is start linking this discussion more concretely to what are the future of places. So in particular, thinking about the role of city centres and town centres. Actually, is there an opportunity with the transition to net zero to not just retrofit homes, but when we think about placemaking and creating new spaces, better making sure that we join up a whole range of policy agendas. So making sure, as well as the housing policy in place to ensure our homes are net zero, we've got good net zero transport links across places as well as within places. So there's a bit of work to be done there in terms of joining up different policy agendas. I think the final thing that I will say is I think it's really important now, given where we are and given the timescales, that we do see that collective action on this agenda. And I think there's basically two things which need to happen. Everyone at the city level needs to start doing this, and we're already seeing Andy Burnham's team and his deputies lead that charge, and that's really good. But also there needs to be more pressure on the UK government, because actually at the minute we're simply not moving at the pace we need to move at. And I think pace is really important in this debate. If we spend the best part of the next decade basically umming and ahhing over, what is the best solution? Oh, how are we actually going to get the skilled installers trained up? We're going to lose too much time. We've got, a range of technological options in front of us. We know what we need to do in terms of the skill system to better orientate that to net zero jobs. So really, we need to start doing a lot of this. This does need to be the decisive decade of action. So I think I just end on a final call that actually it's about doing something now. And that requires us just not thinking about what the mayors can do, but also making sure the UK government is prepared to work with the mayors, give them the powers and resources they need so that we can actually start moving further and more ambitiously on this.
Fantastic, Jonny. Of course, I agree with that. And I think, the thing is, it's that point, we can't lose time. We've lost so much time already. And I think that whole thing about the emergency and the gap really between, the human behavior and what actually needs to be done. It does literally needs to be leveled up in terms of the thinking and the actual delivery. And I think Greater Manchester should be allowed to get on with it. That's what Andy Burnham wants to do things differently, but we need the levers, I think, to do that. So that's really good. I'm going to bring in Andrew's got, after having such a lovely wake up and day so far, he's got to go to the dentist. So I was just going to quickly ask him to come back before he does pop off to the dentist. And I'm going to bring in my very good friend, Lord Richard Best, as well, just to give some thoughts and feedback. And then I'm going to come to the panel the audience, and I'm going to bring in the Northern Housing Consortium, Will and Tassos. Andrew, you first.
Thank you very much, Jill. Yes, a day of contrast as far as I'm concerned. I'm off to the dentist, but it's been great to hear my panelists. I think violent agreement is what was offered as on the menu. We're quite good at violent agreements on these meetings, and a lot of the panelists are on meetings like this all the time, and we all violently agree. So it's hard for me to understand why we're not making more progress, to be frank. And I tried to point at one particular thing we need to do, which is to get the training stuff sorted out. And again, Greater Manchester, we are not victims. We sometimes behave as though if somebody else did something, we'd get on much better. Actually, we've got an awful lot of this stuff in our grasp, and further education and higher education, we make a lot about the partnership we've got in Greater Manchester. Well, let's make it work. Let's say to them, and let them say to us as well, these are what we need to have got in terms of skills and capacity and capability over the next 5 years. This is how we're going to set about it, and let's do that. And let's be an exemplar, a leader. There isn't any reason why Greater Manchester shouldn't be the hotspot for skills development for this. I think there was a theme of technology, and the chat had some stuff about, well, no, it's about fabric first. I actually think it's about fabric first. Technology is a bit of, you can have lots of different technology, but if you don't have a well-insulated house, you're wasting nearly all of it. But actually going back a step further, and a lot of the panelists quite rightly said it's about people. So maybe it's people first rather than fabric first. And certainly technology comes last in terms of taking those decisions. And that brings me to one other point I want to make, which is, why do we always have to have grand plans? If you're going to deal with the 700,000 owner-occupied homes in Greater Manchester, the idea that you can have a package or a set plan that you deliver house after house, street after street, is rubbish. They've got observatories and conservatories and loft extensions and different sorts of heating, and some people are unemployed, and some people have got their mothers living with them, and some are going to have A levels next year. You cannot have a one-size-fits-all package of anything, and therefore having a grand plan is a waste of time. What you need is an overarching aim and some delivery mechanisms. And I'll just wear my National Home Improvement Council badge for just a moment and say over 1 million central heating units are changed every year without any drama at all. A white van turns up, they stick outside your house for 2 days, they change your boiler, they go away. Okay, it's a bit of a problem for you, but not for anybody else. Why can't we just start to think about doing this job house by house, one by one? Just as an example, 35,000 homes a year are sold in Greater Manchester. Why aren't we doing something at the point of sale for those 35,000 homes which are sold? That's when the house is empty. That's when you can actually take the floor up and put the insulation in, when you can change the heating system with the least disruption. There's a whole set of things where we are just not looking at the right problem in the right way. And Greater Manchester could be laying out a scheme that would work and will work, and it could be making itself a leader for the country, not a victim waiting for somebody else to come up with a really good scheme. And now, if you'll excuse me, Jill, I'm going to go and lie on the chair and take it like a man. Thank you very much indeed.
All right, knock yourself out. Thanks very much, Andrew, for that. And I've loved that. And I think, Charlie, you've also sort of like, you know, let's people first, fabric. So, you know, that whole thing, what the order of it, and this whole thing around, you know, bespoke, and the idea, it's common sense. Isn't it? You've just pointed out that it's common sense that when the house is empty, that is the time. You know, it's not, we just need to think a little bit more creatively and joined uply, you know, and get on with some of these things. So that's really good. I'm going to now I'll go over to Richard, if that's okay. And thank you again for all your time this morning, Andrew. And obviously, the mighty Richard Best wears many hats, but I've known him an awful long time. And but most of all, I think the Affordable Housing Commission, I think, is worth noting here, because affordability has come up in terms of this discussion today. And I'd be interested to hear what you've got to say anyway.
Jill, thank you very much. What a terrifically rich discussion. Really glad to listen in on all of this. And emphasizing skills, training, jobs, this is very high on the political agenda, and I'm absolutely right to concentrate on those things. I want to address a point, Jill, you brought it out a bit, and others have mentioned it sort of in passing, but it's the delivery. It's actually joining up, making things happen, and getting the buy-in of everybody involved in the process. What levers can we actually pull to achieve zero carbon decarbonization? How is it going to happen? Just for real. You can have government dishing out white papers and even mayors coming up with proper strategies and plans, but actually on the ground, in the street, how do things happen? I just want to look briefly at the making it happen. So the three sectors, social housing, private rented sector, and the owner occupiers. Social housing, lots of you involved in the social housing sector, it's going to happen. There's lots of problems, endless problems. It's going to be tough, but the social housing landlords will succeed in retrofitting, if we're allowed to still use that word, in decarbonizing their existing. This is going to happen. I do agree that taking the residents of those homes with you is absolutely fundamental. I think it was Charlie that mentioned the Northern Housing Consortium's initiative with 6 social housing landlords. They're setting up this social housing tenants jury, collecting people together, getting presentations of the evidence so that that group representing the much wider group of social housing tenants can come to conclusions and can feel what is right, can understand, can pass judgment from a basis of knowledge because they've had the input to them. It's copying, I don't know if anybody saw the Citizens Climate Assembly. Go to iPlayer. This is very inspiring stuff. 108 people were brought together. 6 of the House of Commons committees clubbed together to initiate this Citizens Assembly, which then produced its recommendations. They said all the right things. It was incredibly encouraging. It all started off skeptics thinking that what a bad idea this is and why should our lives be disrupted, and rainforests are a long way from here. But in the end, all come round to accepting the urgent need to do something about climate change, to decarbonize their homes. It's a great program. Trouble is, we can't get David Attenborough to talk face to face with every citizen in the country. But that bringing together, engaging the public, that's got to be part of where social housing takes it. But there's the £3.8 billion. We've only spent a tiny fraction of that so far. The Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. Got to get used to dealing with bees. We don't know those so well as NHIC, so we got some new people to deal with. But I think the money will come. The social housing sector will get it right in the end. But got to pay attention to the consumer, to the residents themselves. PRS, the private rented sector. The private rented sector, you may not have quite caught up with this because I only just got there. It's in decline. It's reducing in size. It's gone down from 20% to latest figures 18.7%. Private landlords are getting out. A third of them say that they're going to sell one, they've probably only got one, but one or more of their properties in the current 12 months. We're seeing the sector decline because it is facing more cost. It's noticed in the pandemic that people don't always pay the rent, and it's a hell of a hassle to get people to court. The horrors of evictions, nobody wants to be part of that. It's not such a brilliant idea being a private landlord as an amateur after all. People are getting out, they're exiting the market. Now that can mean a couple of things. It can mean that they sell to people who are less scrupulous, who don't follow the regulations, who know that enforcement by local authorities is a bit slender very often, and who exploit the situation, make money and carry on, or they can sell to social landlords. And Jill, you were mentioning the Affordable Housing Commission. We've advocated a national housing conversion fund, which would be a bundle of money to enable social housing landlords to buy up private landlords and modernize, retrofit, renew, I think that's not a bad word, renew those properties and then re-let them as social rented properties. This is back to the future because so many housing associations came in on this, buying street properties, getting people a decent home with security that they don't get in the private rented sector. I stand by our Affordable Housing Commission's recommendation. I think there's real mileage in this. In Greater London, they are allowing 10% of the affordable homes program to be allocated for the acquisition of existing properties. It saves money in temporary accommodation for local authorities. It gets the properties modernized. They're in safe hands. I think it is a way of doing some good and using the skills of the social housing landlords to do it as the PRS takes a bit of a turn for the worst and declines, but without losing those properties, without losing them to the rented sector. And then finally, the owner-occupied sector, the third one, Andrew Stunell. All these Lib Dems are very pleased with themselves today. So I noticed a big grin on his face despite the dentist. But Andrew making the point that 700,000 owner-occupiers in Greater Manchester, that's an awful lot of people. What are we going to do to actually reach them? Who's got the energy? Who's got the time? Who's going to get the buy-in? Who's going to engage people one by one, particularly older people who are going to be pretty hostile to the idea of having their lives disrupted and going to need a lot of persuading this is a good idea. Well, we used to have a lot more home improvement agencies, staying put, care and repair agencies. These are becoming increasingly part of our memory rather than being absolutely upfront in terms of the future. And I think we're neglecting this sector. They started off about the same sort of size as the fledgling housing associations in my early days. And the housing associations are now huge businesses and incredibly important to the national scene and the national economy. Home improvement agencies are tiny minnows who have not got very far. And the link between the two, the housing associations and the home improvement agencies, has got pretty tenuous. I used to chair Hanover Housing Association. We had 22 home improvement agencies under our wing, 22. By the time I finished as chair of Hanover, we had none. We had shed that. It didn't seem to be the real emphasis for us. And that's, that's typical across the piece. But perhaps we need to rebuild those links and recognize that these agencies are incredibly important, not just in organizing the builders, making sure people don't get ripped off, making sure the grants reach the right people, and not repeating this Green Homes grant fiasco, which has been a complete dead loss, useless business. Getting it right, having people on the ground who can earn the trust and confidence of local people. Perhaps we want to be reviving this, and perhaps the social housing landlords are the partners who could make that happen. So I leave you with those thoughts. And absolutely, Greater Manchester, as usual, ought to be and probably will be leading on these things. So we're in the right place today. Jill, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, great. Thank you very much, Richard. And again, I think that whole thing about the conversion fund is inspired and needs some more thought in terms of how we can marry that with Greater Manchester's ambitions, really. I think there's a lot there. Okay, we haven't got much time left, so I'm going to bring in Tassos, Will and Kieran. If you could just we'll take all three of you together in terms of point and question, and then I'll do a quick roundup of any feedback. Yeah, so Tassos first.
Hello, Jill. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me as one of the panelists today. So we have been working on the carbon and energy policy implementation study, which is an evidence basis for Greater Manchester Combined Authority in terms of the technical standards required, as long as with the actions required to actually develop the net zero transition post 2028 for all new developments. And I'm not going to dwell in my background and my involvement with policy development, but I think the main question remains there are two distinct streams on this journey to net zero. And one is about the consumer and the human interface. What are we trying to do? It's very human-centric. We try to protect future generations and the experience of the people today. And there is a technical stream as well, which is what kind of solutions, technologies, and processes we can occupy to actually deliver this goal for the people in a cost-effective and sensible manner. And my question was very specific to the type of feedback loops that we have in place at the moment, because we can see a lot of technological options. We can see all these gaps or perceived gaps within skills and knowledge, different materials used. So we identified as one of the main weaknesses to be able to extract the experience from what we have done successfully from implementing these solutions. So I think that was main question to the panel. Do you think that we have enough feedback loops? Do we get informed? Do we get a chance for the policy to be informed by our decisions on site, on construction, and understand better what we're actually delivering and the impact it might have to the user during the life of the building? Okay, sorry for the complicated question. Thank you, Jill.
Yeah. Thanks, Tassos. That's great. William.
Yeah, I'm going to sort of spin out a little bit about the original question I was thinking about. I think one of the things in the role, so I work in higher education. I'm a director of Energy House Labs, but also I'm part of the Green Buildings Challenge Group. I chair the Low Carbon Buildings Group, and I'm on the Retrofit Task Force. So we worked in this area in the city for a good decade. And I think the one thing that I'm seeing changing, and I'm interested in the panel's view of it, is the digitisation and decarbonisation of the grid what opportunities and changes do they see that bringing to both retrofit, so decarbonisation of the new and existing housing stock?
Okay, very good. And Claire, thank you for joining. You've also asked a question in the chat. So over to you very quickly.
Very quickly. Good morning, everyone. I'm a PhD researcher at the Stunell Climate Change Institute here in Manchester. My query is really about the achievement of thermal comfort and that kind of understanding, particularly around air source heat pumps. That is a very different mechanism, but also to include cooling in this. Obviously, with climate change, we're expecting warmer and wetter summers. And obviously, at a certain point, there will be a huge cooling demand in that. So not to forget cooling, I think, was my query. Thank you.
Okay, so who wants to have a crack at any of those questions and final comments or thoughts? I'm just going to pick on anybody. Pick on Henri.
I think in 30 seconds, I think there's lots of potential in terms of what's changing on the grid, and I think that in the chat there was a long discussion about fabric versus other interventions, which I think is really welcome. But I do think that the opportunities to think about smart grids is clearly that putting renewables on people's houses isn't just about the affordability of that person's own lifestyle, right? That's also potentially about reducing the need to harden grid infrastructure. So I think that when we start to create the financial models for this, that we need to be really clear that what's happening in the energy system, particularly in the electricity system, does provide opportunities at a GM level. And clearly ENW have a very particular set of aspirations around how they want to keep costs down to customers. And actually sometimes deploying renewables at the level of households will be about solving problems in the energy system, and the benefits to that individual customer will be great, but the cost to them will be a lot less than it would otherwise be. And I think that we've got to find that low-hanging fruit in the energy system to bring particularly those who might be in disadvantaged communities close to large urban centres some of the benefits that might come right from being able to generate electricity very in the Manchester city centre, which I think another big sites where there's huge energy need going to be growing, and you don't want to necessarily harden the grid massively. There's huge benefits there, Jill. So I absolutely agree with the questioner that that's an area we need to look at, and it's one of the areas where this is about getting those synergies between what the housing sector can do and what the energy system can do, and not seeing them as being two separate sets of interventions to address what is actually fundamentally the same problems.
Yeah. And John, you've got your hand up, so come on in. Again, any quick last comments as well?
Yeah, well, I said in the chat to Tassos that I agree we need to improve feedback loops. It's one of the things we're looking to do. When I talked about scale up, that would include improving feedback loops by getting the industry to work together and to share information, but also work with partners like Greater Manchester so that we're all helping each other in that journey. But we do need to improve the SAT methodology which people use for design purposes as well. On the grid, I mean, a really big point that we didn't touch on earlier is that we're going to be increasing electricity load because we've got EV vehicles. New build would include EV charging as well as decarbonising power supply, and heat pumps are electrically fueled. So there are a lot of big challenges about energy infrastructure. So digitisation, the opportunities around that and how we can make the infrastructure work effectively and respond to demand in the right ways is going to be an absolutely critical point.
Right, thank you. I think we're coming to an end. I know we haven't probably touched on your question, Claire, but I absolutely, through my Healthy Homes and Buildings, I'm with you on that one. Very much part of, where we need to be in terms of our thinking. I'm just going to have a very quick thank you to all our speakers, but if you could all just quickly, any final comments and thoughts and conclusions. I'll go to you, Charlie. Henri, I'll give you a tip because you've already asked a question, and I'll do Jonny, Nick, and Suzy.
Thanks for that, Jill. It's been a great discussion, hasn't it? And we've had that violent agreement thing again. I think we've all agreed that it's time for action, and I particularly enjoyed some of the comments around the people first, and then fabric, and then technology. And it is about bringing people along, but it's about having a bespoke approach to each home, not big strategies that take 2 years to coordinate. It's about just having a plan for each home and actually getting on with it and cracking on with it. And I really liked the point that was made about retrofit. Is that the right comment? It's about improvement, and it's about renewal and all of those things. So it's certainly put fire in my belly, actually, to go back to the GM housing providers with some of the comments that have been made. And I do think the social housing sector has got an opportunity here to actually go first and to trial things and to work in partnership, as has been discussed. So thank you for the opportunity to join the discussion.
Okay, and Nick from N8.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree with the comment that we just need to get on with it, but we also need to maintain flexibility. If we're talking about a 2038 target, that's 17 years. If we think 17 years back to 2004 and the technological change that's happened in those 17 years, we need to maintain the flexibility and not become blinkered onto any one particular technology, but remain able to be agile should new disruptive technologies emerge.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's a tendency to, because there's a vacuum, people grab hold of what's there. So hydrogen always comes up in every conversation. So, okay, Jonny.
Yeah, I mean, just a quick one from me. And I think, again, it's to re-emphasize the point of, we are in a really strong position in Manchester in terms of both the political energy there, as well as the energy from housing providers, industry as well, to get on board with this agenda. It's the famous saying, isn't it, where Manchester leads, the world follows. And sorry to offend anyone who's not from Manchester on the call, but in this case, there is a really good opportunity to put that into practice. And I think actually, we can't pretend there aren't significant challenges to face, but I think now with the devolution framework we have, with a few more powers available, the right support from UK government to kind of support the overarching national policy framework, we could be in a really good position by 2025 to not have completely done this, obviously, but point to some really positive examples of where this has happened and the difference it has made. And the more of those examples that you see come to life, you're going to start seeing a critical mass behind it. So that's why it's important to get moving, whether it's in the social rented sector or elsewhere, to show those positive examples, show the improvement it has on people's lives. And from there, you can start to generate that critical mass and move things forward.
And Suzy, finally.
Sorry, I wasn't ready with my unmute button. Yes, thank you so much for inviting me to be involved in this. It's been really great to hear what everybody's saying, because in a way it kind of comforts me that we're doing all of the right things and we're moving in the right direction, not kind of as, kind of loners in that space, but that we're supported by everybody else working in the industry, and that we kind of all want to get to the same point. There's things that we're doing at Splash where we are slightly different, and I think hearing the things today about cooling through design, thinking about people's homes in terms of individuality and bespokeness, which we do through our configurability, and really driving the kind of energy efficiency and driving down the embodied carbon through fabric first. It's comforted me that we're on the right path.
Fantastic, and what a good point to wrap this up. I think it's been a great discussion. I think there is, as always, a great rich seam of consensus and also collaboration. We do need to join it all up. I do think we need to get on with it, and I do think that Greater Manchester's got a pretty good chance of leading the way here, and being first off the block. So let's do that. Thank you to all our tremendous panel. You've all been fantastic. I hope you have all a fantastic, lovely weekend. I think it rains on Sunday for Father's Day for your fathers out there, but we will see you again on the 25th of June when we're looking at another thorny emergency issue of social care and supported housing. And I think, again, that was a big thing that came out in terms of the keys to recovery. We need to get that sorted and done, and how we're going to do that. So please keep coming to these sessions. The ultimate point of this is about lobbying government and influencing the shape of future policy for Greater Manchester. So please join us next time, and thank you again. Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks, Jill. Thanks, everybody. Bye.